Alright, here's a fairy tale from Turkey. It tells of the son and daughter of a ruler who, after their father's death, are obliged to leave their kingdom and wander the earth. Unfortunately, the young prince, in great thirst, drinks enchanted water and is changed into a stag. How he cares for his sister in a tree, how a wily old woman entices her to come down to marry the padishah. How she is swallowed by a big fish through the trickery of a jealous slave girl, and there gives birth to a princeling. How through everything she is finally restored to her husband, the padishah. Well, read and see. This is called The Stag Prince, as said prior. Now, once upon a time, there lived a padishah who had one son and one daughter. Now, the padishah grew old. His time came, he died, and his son ruled in his stead. The son ruled unwisely, and soon he had lost his whole inheritance. One day he said to his sister, "All our money is spent. If people were to know it, they would drive us from our home, and we should never be able to hold up our heads again. Far better, therefore, to depart and take up our life elsewhere." They packed the little they had left, and then during the night the brother and sister left their father's palace and wandered forth into the wide world. They went on till they came to a vast burning desert. The youth felt that he could not go a step farther when he saw a little puddle of water. "Little sister," he said, "I cannot go on till I have drunk this water." "No, dear brother," replied the girl. "Who can tell whether it is good or not? Surely we can hold out a little longer. We will find fresh water soon enough." "I tell you," replied her brother, "I will not go another step till I've drunk, though I die from it." With that he knelt down, drank every drop of the water, which was enchanted, and instantly he became a stag. The little sister wept bitterly at this misfortune, but there was nothing to do but go on. They went up hill and down dale and across the sandy waste until they came to a spring beneath a large tree. There they sat and rested. "Listen now, little sister," said the stag. "You must climb into that tree while I try to find something to eat." The girl climbed the tree, and the stag ran up hill and down dale, caught a hare, brought it back, and he and his sister ate it together. And so they lived from day to day and from week to week. Now the padishah's horses were usually watered at the spring beneath the large tree. One evening the horsemen came as usual, but just as the horses were about to drink, they caught sight of the reflection of the damsel in the water and reared back. The horsemen fancied that perhaps the water was not quite pure, so they emptied the trough and filled it afresh. But again the horses reared back and would not drink. The horsemen did not know what to make of it, so they told the padishah. "Perhaps the water is muddy," said the padishah. "It is not," the horseman replied. "We emptied the trough once and filled it again with fresh water, and yet the horses would not drink." "Go again," said their master, "and look well about you. There may be something near the spring that frightens them." The horsemen returned, and casting their eyes at last on the large tree, they perceived the damsel and immediately went back and told the padishah. The padishah went to look for himself, and there in the tree was a damsel as lovely as the moon. He could not take his eyes off of her. "Are you spirit or peri?" said the padishah. "I am neither a spirit nor a peri, but mortal as you are," she replied. The padishah begged her to come down from the tree, but nothing he could say would make her come down. Now the Padishah became angry. He commanded his men to cut down the tree. They brought their axes and hewed away at the vast trunk. They hewed and hewed until only a little strip remained. Meanwhile, it began to grow dark, so they left off their work until the next day. Scarcely had they departed when the stag came running out of the forest and asked the little sister what had happened. The girl told him the story. "You did well," said the stag, "and take care not to come down, whatever they may say." With that, he went to the tree, licked it with his tongue, and immediately the trunk filled in where they had hewed it. The next day, when the stag had again departed about his business, the Padishah's men came and saw that the tree was larger and stronger than before. Again they set to work and hewed till they had cut it half through. By that time evening had come, and once more they put off finishing till the following day. All their labor was lost, however, for again the stag came and licked the tree, and immediately the trunk grew thicker and harder than ever. Early next morning, right after the stag had departed, the Padishah and his woodcutters returned. When they saw that the trunk had become whole again, they determined to try some other means of getting the girl to come down. They went home and sent for a famous old witch. They told her the story and promised her a rich reward if she could, by some subtle trick, make the damsel come down. The old witch willingly agreed, and bringing an iron tripod, a cauldron, and sundry raw meats, she placed them by the spring. Then she set up the tripod and hung the kettle on it, but upside down. When this was done, she drew water from the spring and poured it, not into the kettle, but onto the ground. All the while she kept her eyes closed as if she were blind. The damsel thought she really was blind and called down to her, "My dear elder sister, you have put the kettle on the tripod upside down, and all the water has poured on the ground." "Oh, my sweet damsel," cried the old woman, "that's because I have no eyes to see with. I have brought some dirty linen with me, and if you love Allah, come down and help me wash it." The damsel thought of her brother's words, however, and she did not come down. The next day the old witch came again, stumbled around, laid a fire, and brought out a heap of meal to sift, but instead of meal, she put ashes into the sieve. "Poor old granny," cried the damsel compassionately, and called down to the old woman that she was sifting ashes instead of meal. "Oh, my dear damsel," the old woman wept, "I am blind, I cannot see. Come down and help me in my affliction." But the stag had strictly commanded his sister again that very morning not to come down, whatever might be said to her, and she obeyed. On the third day the old witch appeared again. This time she brought a sheep with her and a knife to flay it with, and she began to jab and skin it from behind instead of cutting its throat. The poor little sheep bleated piteously, and the damsel, unable to endure the sight of its sufferings, came down from the tree to put the poor thing out of its misery. Then the Padishah, who was hidden nearby, rushed out and carried the damsel off to his palace. The damsel was so beautiful that the Padishah wanted to marry her without delay, but she would not consent till they had found her brother, the stag. Until she saw him again, she said, she would not have a moment's rest. The Padishah sent men out into the forest, and they caught the stag and brought him to his sister. After that, he never left her side. Even after the Padishah and the damsel were wed, the stag was never far away from them, and in the evening he would softly stroke each of them with his hoof before going to sleep beside them, and he would say, "This little foot is for my sister. That little foot is for my brother." They would have lived on happily in this way had there not been a certain female slave in the palace. Jealousy devoured her at the thought that the Padishah had taken to his bosom the ragged damsel from the treetop rather than herself, and she watched for an opportunity for revenge. Now there was a beautiful palace garden with a fountain in it, and there the Padishah's bride would walk about. One day, with a golden saucer in her hand and a silver sandal on her foot, she went toward the great fountain, and the jealous slave followed her and pushed her in. There was a big fish in the fountain, and it immediately swallowed up the Padishah's lovely wife. Then the slave returned to the palace, put on the Sultana's golden raiment, and sat down in her place. In the evening, the Padishah came and asked the damsel what she had done to her face, that it was so much altered. "I have walked too much in the garden, and I am weary," the slave said. The Padishah believed her and sat down beside her. But the stag came also, and when he began to stroke them both with his hoof, he recognized the slave girl as he said, "This little foot is for my sister, and this little foot is for my brother." It became the one wish of the slave girl's heart to be rid of the stag as quickly as possible, lest he should betray her. After some thought, she pretended to be sick, sent for the doctors, and gave them a large sum of money to tell the Padishah that the only thing that could save her was to eat the heart of the stag. So the doctors went and told the Padishah that she must swallow the stag's heart, or there was no hope for her. Then the Padishah went to the slave girl, whom he still thought to be his own wife, and asked her if she could really bear to eat her own brother's heart. "What can I do?" sighed the impostor. "If I die, what will become of my poor little pet? If he is cut up, I shall live, while he will be spared the torments of those poor beasts that grow old and sick." The Padishah gave orders that a butcher's knife should be whetted, and a fire lighted, and a cauldron of water put over the fire. The poor stag perceived all the bustling about, and he ran down into the garden to the fountain, and called out 3 times to his sister, "The knife is on the stone, the water's on the boil. Haste, little sister, hasten." And thrice she answered back to him from the fish's interior, "Here am I in the fish's belly, in my hand a golden saucer, on my foot a silver sandal, in my arms a little Padishah." For the Padishah's wife had given birth to a son in the fish's belly. Now the Padishah was intent on catching the stag when it ran down into the garden to the fountain. He came up softly behind it and heard every word of what the brother and sister were saying to each other. He quietly ordered all the water to be drained off the basin of the fountain, drew up the fish, cut open its belly, and what do you think he saw? In the belly of the fish was his wife, a golden saucer in her hand and a silver sandal on her foot, and in her arms a little son. The Padishah embraced his wife, kissed his son, and brought them both to the palace. Then he heard the whole tale to the very end. As for the stag, he had found some magic substance in the fish's blood, and when he had swallowed it, he turned into a prince again. He rushed to his sister, and they embraced and wept with joy. The Padishah sent for the jealous slave girl and asked her which she would like best, 4 good steeds or 4 good swords. "Let the swords be for the throats of my enemies," she replied. "Give me the 4 steeds that I may take my pleasure on horseback." Then the Padishah's men tied the slave girl to the tails of 4 good steeds and sent her out for a ride. And the 4 steeds tore the jealous girl into little bits and scattered them to the winds. But the Padishah and his wife lived happily together. And the king's son, who had once been a stag, stayed with them. They gave a great banquet, which lasted 40 days and 40 nights, and they all attained their desires during a long and happy life. The badger is often found in Japanese fairy tales, for he is considered a particularly mischievous and fun-loving creature like the fox or the chipmunk in the West. In the three small tales that follow, the badger takes the chief role, and his nature is the nub of the story. In the accomplished and strange tea kettle, one of the few humorous fairy tales, the badger goes beyond fun to tease and bewilder human folk. But happily a tinker understands him, and all ends well. In the badger's gratitude, he becomes friends with a priest, and the story expresses the reverence that all Asians have for that human relationship called friendship. A friend gives, a friend receives. They are the two sides of the same act, equally essential for true friendship. Now, in the Crackling Mountain, the badger is the villain. Evil and good struggle together. Sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between them, for both use trickery to gain their ends. But, as usual in fairy tales, the good wins, and thus is expressed the eternal hope of the human heart. Now, this story here is called The Accomplished and Strange Tea Kettle. Now, a long time ago, at a temple in one of the eastern provinces, there was an old tea kettle. One day, when the priest of the temple was about to hang it over the earth to boil the water for his tea, to his amazement, the kettle suddenly developed the head and tail of a badger. What an unusual kettle to come out covered all over with fur! The priest, thunderstruck, called in the novices of the temple to see the sight. And while they were stupidly staring and suggesting one thing and another, the kettle, jumping up into the air, began flying all about the room. More astonished than ever, the priest and his pupils tried to pursue it, but no thief or cat was ever half so sharp as this wonderful badger kettle. At last, however, they managed to catch it, and holding it with their united efforts, they forced it into a box, intending to carry it off and throw it away in some distant place, so that they might be plagued no more. But as luck would have it, the tinker who fixed things for the temple stopped in. The priest suddenly thought that it would be a pity to throw the kettle away, and that he might as well get a trifle for it. So he brought out the kettle, which had got rid of its head and tail and had resumed its former shape, and showed it to the tinker. When the tinker saw the kettle, he offered 20 copper coins for it, and the priest was only too glad to close the bargain and be rid of his troublesome pot. Soon the tinker trudged off toward home with his pack and his new purchase. That night, as he lay asleep, he heard a strange noise near his pillow. He peeped out from under the bedclothes, and there he saw the kettle he had bought, covered with fur. It had the head and tail of a badger and was walking about on 4 legs. The tinker started up in a fright when all of a sudden the kettle resumed its former shape. This happened over and over again each night until at last one day the tinker showed the tea kettle to a friend of his. "This is certainly an accomplished and lucky tea kettle," the friend said. "You should take it about as a show, with accompaniment of the songs and of musical instruments, and make it dance and walk the tightrope." The tinker, thinking this good advice, made arrangements with a showman, and they set up an exhibition. The fame of the kettle's performances soon spread about until even the princes of the land sent for the tinker to put on a show for them, and he grew rich beyond all his expectations. Even the princesses and the great ladies of the court took delight in the fur-covered dancing kettle, so that no sooner had it shown its tricks in one place than it was time for them to move on to some other engagement. At last, the tinker grew so rich that he gave the now famous kettle back to the temple, where it was kept on display as a precious treasure. All right, now this one here is called The Badger's Gratitude. Pardon me. Once upon a time, there lived an old priest famous neither for learning nor wisdom, who spent his days in prayer and meditation. He had not even a child to wait upon him, but prepared his food with his own hands. Night and morning he recited his prayers, intent upon them alone. Although the fame of his virtue did not reach far, yet his neighbors respected and revered him, and often brought him food and clothing. When his roof or walls were in disrepair, they would mend them for him, and so for the things of this world he was well provided. One very cold night, when he little thought anyone would be outside, he heard a voice calling, "Your Reverence, your Reverence." He rose and went to see who it was, and there, standing near the door, he beheld an old badger. Any ordinary man would have been greatly alarmed at the apparition, but the priest, being such a man as described above, showed no sign of fear. Instead, he asked the creature its business. Upon this, the badger respectfully knelt and replied, "Hitherto, sir, my home has been in the mountains, and of snow or frost I have taken no heed. Now I am growing old, and this severe cold is more than I can bear. I pray you let me enter and warm myself at your fire, so that I may live through this bitter night." When the priest heard what a helpless state the beast was reduced to, he was filled with pity. "Of course," he said, "make haste and come in and warm yourself." The badger, delighted with this reception, came into the hut and sat down by the fire, while the priest, with renewed fervor, recited his prayers and struck his bell before the image of Buddha, looking straight before him. Now, after 2 hours, the badger took his leave with profuse expressions of thanks. From that time forth, he came to the hut every night, always bringing dried branches and dead leaves from the hills for firewood. The priest at last became very friendly with him and got used to his company, so that as the night wore on, if ever the badger did not arrive, he would miss him and wonder why he had not come. When the winter was over and the springtime came at the end of the second month of the new year, the badger gave up his visits and was not seen until winter came again. Then the beast resumed his old habit of coming to the hut. Now, when this practice had gone on for 10 years, the badger said to the priest, "Through your reverence's kindness all these years, I have been able to pass the winter nights in comfort. During all my life and even after my death, I will remember your favors. What can I do to repay you? If there is anything you wish, pray tell me." The priest, smiling at this speech, answered, "Glad as I am to hear your kind intentions. There's nothing that I can ask you to do for me. You need feel no anxiety on my account. As long as I live, when winter comes, you shall be welcome." The badger, on hearing this, could not conceal his admiration for the depth of the old man's benevolence, but having so much to be grateful for, he felt hurt at not being able to return his kindness. As this subject was often renewed between them, the priest, touched at last by the goodness of the badger's heart, said, "Since I have shaved my head, renounced the world, and forsaken the pleasures of this life, I have no desire to gratify, yet I should like to possess 3 pieces of gold. Food and raiment I receive by the favor of the villagers, so I take no heed for these things. Were I to die tomorrow and attain my wish of being born again into the next world, the same kind folk have promised to take my body and bury it. Thus, alas, I have no other reason to wish for money. Still, I had 3 pieces of gold. I would offer them up at some holy shrine, so that masses and prayers might be said for my salvation." Yet I would not get this money by violent or unlawful means. I only think of what might be if I had it. So you see, since you have expressed such kind feelings toward me, I have told you what is on my mind." When the priest had finished speaking, the badger tilted his head to one side with a puzzled and anxious look. The old man was sorry he had expressed a wish that seemed to trouble the beast, and he tried to retract his words. Posthumous honors, after all, are the wish of ordinary men. I, who am a priest, ought not to entertain such thoughts or to want money. So please pay no attention to what I have said." And the badger, feigning assent, returned to the hills as usual. From that time forth, the badger came no more to the hut. The priest thought this very strange, but imagined either that the badger stayed away because he did not like to come without the money, or that he had been killed in an attempt to steal it. He blamed himself for having expressed his wish, and persuaded that the badger must have been killed. He passed his time in putting up prayers upon prayers for him. Now one night, after 3 years had gone by, the old man heard a voice near his door calling out, "Your Reverence, your Reverence." He jumped up as soon as he heard the familiar voice and ran to open the door. Sure enough, there was the badger. The priest, in great delight, cried out, "You are safe and sound after all. Why have you taken so long to come back? I've been expecting you anxiously this long while." The badger came into the hut and said, "If the money you required had been for unlawful purposes, I could easily have procured as much as ever you wanted. But when I heard that it was to be offered to a temple for prayers for your soul, I thought that if I were to steal another man's hidden treasure, you could not apply to a sacred purpose money which had been obtained at the expense of his sorrow. So I went to the island of Sado, and gathering the sand and earth which had been cast away as worthless by the miners, fused it again in the fire, and that's where I've spent these many months." When the badger finished speaking, the priest looked at the gold he had brought, and sure enough, he saw that it was bright and new and clean. He took the gold respectfully. "So you have had all this toil and labor on account of a foolish speech of mine. I have obtained my heart's desire and am truly thankful." After he finished thanking the badger with great politeness and ceremony, the beast said, "In doing this, I have but fulfilled my own wish. Still, I hope that you will not tell this to any man who might force me to do the same toil for him." "Indeed," replied the priest, "I have no choice but to tell this story. For if I keep the gold in my poor hut, it will be stolen by thieves. I must either give it to someone to keep for me, or at once offer it up at the temple. And when I do this, when people see a poor old priest with a sum of money quite unsuited to his station, they will think it very suspicious, and I shall have to tell the tale as it occurred. But I shall say that the badger who gave me the gold has ceased coming to my hut, so you need not fear being waylaid, but can come as always and shelter yourself from the cold." To this the badger nodded assent, and as long as the old priest lived, he came and spent the winter nights with him. This one here is called the Crackling Mountain. Now once upon a time there lived an old man and an old woman who kept a pet white hare by which they set great store. One day a badger who lived nearby came and ate up the food which had been put out for the hare. The old man, flying into a great rage, seized the badger and tied him to a tree. Then he went off to the mountain to cut wood while the old woman stayed at home and ground the wheat for the evening porridge. As soon as the old man had left, the badger, with tears in his eyes, called to the old woman, "Please, dame, please untie this rope." The old woman, thinking it was a cruel thing to see a poor beast in pain, undid the rope. The ungrateful badger was no sooner loosed than he cried out, "I'll be revenged for this," and was off in a trice. Now, when the hare heard this, he ran off to the mountain to warn the old man. And while he was away on this errand, the badger came back and killed the old woman. When the old man returned, he was horrified at what he found and set up a great lamentation. While he was bewailing his fate, the hare came home and seeing how matters stood, he determined to avenge the death of his mistress. He went back to the mountain and, falling in with the badger, who was carrying a bundle of sticks on his back, he struck a light and set fire to them, without letting the badger see him do so. When the badger heard the crackling noise of the burning sticks on his back, he called out, "What is that noise?" "Oh," answered the hare, "this is called the crackling mountain. There's always such a noise here." As the fire gathered strength and went pop, 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 the badger called again, "Oh dear, what can this noise be?" "This is called the Pop Pop Mountain," answered the hare. All at once the fire began to singe the badger's back. He fled howling with pain and jumped into a river nearby. But although the water put out the fire, his back was burned as black as a cinder. The hare, seeing an opportunity for torturing the badger to his heart's content, now made a poultice of cayenne pepper, which he carried to the badger's house and pretended to help him with this wonderful remedy for burns. He applied the hot poultice to his enemy's sore back. Oh, how it smarted and pained, and how the badger yelled and cried. At last the badger got well again, and he went to the hare's house, thinking to reproach him for having caused him so much pain. When he got there, he found that the hare had built himself a boat. "What have you built that boat for, Mr. Hare?" said the badger. "I'm going to the capital of the moon," answered the hare. "Won't you come with me?" "I had enough of your company on the crackling mountain where you played me some such tricks. I'd rather make a boat for myself," replied the badger, and he immediately began building himself a boat of clay. The hare, seeing this, laughed up his sleeve, and the two launched their boats on the river, and the waves came splashing against the sides. The hare's boat was built of wood, while the badger's was made of clay, and as they rowed down the river, the clay boat began to crumble away, and the badger was drowned. When the old man heard that his wife's death had been avenged, he loved the hare even more than before, and kept him as an honored house pet for the rest of his life. Alright, this Persian fairy tale centers about a young prince, gentle and good, a beautiful princess, and an even more beautiful Peri. This prince was the youngest of the three sons of the Sultan of the Indies. All three brothers were in love with the princess, who had been left in the Sultan's care. The Sultan, much troubled, tried to devise a means whereby he could discover which of his sons was the most worthy to marry the princess. In the end, it was the Peri who helped to decide the matter, and they all lived happily ever after. Now, this story is called Prince Ahmed and the Fairy Parabanu. There once was a sultan who had 3 sons and a niece. The eldest of the princes was called Hussein, the second Ali, the youngest Ahmed, and the princess, his niece, Nouranabar. The princess Nouranabar was the daughter of the sultan's younger brother, who had died and left her an orphan when she was very young. The sultan then took up upon himself the care of his niece's education and brought her up in his palace with the three princes. Thinking to marry her to some neighboring prince when she arrived at a proper age, one day he discovered that the three princes loved her passionately, and he was greatly concerned. The difficulty he foresaw was to make them agree who should have her hand in marriage. He thought that the two younger princes, in defense, should consent to give her up to their eldest brother. When he found them positively against this, he sent for all three. "Children," he said, "since I have not been able to persuade you to choose who should marry the princes, I think it would not be amiss if each of you traveled separately into different countries, so that you will not be together, arguing with one another. As you know, I am very curious, and I delight in everything that's singular. I promised my niece to the one among you who shall bring me the most extraordinary rarity. For its purchase and for the expenses of traveling, I will give you each a sum of money." As the three princes were always obedient to the Sultan's will, and as each thought fortune might prove favorable to him, all consented to this arrangement. The Sultan gave them the money as promised, and that very day they gave orders to their attendants to prepare for their travels, and they took their leave of the Sultan. They planned to be ready to go the next morning. Accordingly, they all set out at the same gate of the city, each dressed like a merchant, attended by a trusted officer disguised as a slave. All were well mounted and equipped. They went the first day's journey together and stayed at an inn where the road branched into three other roads. Now at night, while at supper, all agreed to travel for a year and to meet again at the inn. Whoever came first should wait for the others. Since the three had left together, it was quite possible they might all return together. The next morning, by daybreak, after they had embraced and wished one another good success, they mounted their horses and each took a different road. Prince Hussein, the eldest brother, arrived at Biznagar, the capital of the kingdom of the name and the residence of its king. He lodged at a khan appointed for foreign merchants, and there learned that there were four principal areas where merchants of all kinds sold their commodities and kept their shops. Now in the midst of this marketplace stood the king's palace. Prince Hussein went to one of those areas the next day. He was very impressed and viewed the place with admiration. It was large and divided into several streets, all vaulted and shaded from the sun and yet very light. The shops were all of a size, and all merchants who dealt in the same kinds of goods lived in one street, as also did the handicraftsmen who kept their shops in the smaller streets. Now, give me 1 second. Now the multitude of shops stocked with all sorts of merchandise, the finest linens of India painted in the liveliest colors with figures of beasts, trees, and flowers, silks and brocades from Persia and China, porcelains from both Japan and China, and wondrous tapestries made him doubt his own eyes. When he came to the goldsmiths and jewelers' shops, he was in an ecstasy to behold such prodigious quantities of wrought gold and silver, and dazzled by the luster of the pearls, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and other jewels displayed for sale. Another thing Prince Hussein particularly admired was the great number of rose sellers who crowded the streets, for the Indians are such lovers of that flower that not one will stir without a nosegay in his hand or a garland on his head. The merchants also kept roses in pots in their shops to perfume the air. Now, after Prince Hussein had looked over the wares in that area, street by street, his thoughts were completely filled with the riches he had seen. Since he was very tired, a merchant invited him to sit down in his shop. He had not been seated long before he saw a crier pass by with a piece of tapestry on his arm about 6 feet square. The man cried, "This at 30 purses." The prince called to the crier and asked to see the tapestry, which seemed to him to be valued at an exorbitant price, not only for its size, but for the thinness of the stuff. When he had examined it well, he told the crier that he could not comprehend how so small and insignificant a tapestry could be valued so highly. The crier took him for a merchant, replied, "If this price seems extravagant to you, your amazement will be greater when I tell you I have orders to raise it to 40 purses and not to part with it under that amount." "Certainly," answered the Prince Hussein. It must have something very extraordinary in it, of which I know nothing." "You have guessed the truth, sir," replied the crier. "And the extraordinary thing is that whoever sits on this piece of tapestry may be transported in an instant wherever he desires to be, no matter what the obstacle." At this explanation, the Prince of the Indies, considering that the principal motive of his travel was to carry home some singular rarity, thought that he could not meet with anything which could give him more satisfaction. "If the tapestry has the virtue you assign it," he said to the crier, "I shall not think 40 purses too much, and shall make you a present besides." "Sir," replied the crier, "I have told you the truth. It will be an easy matter to convince you. Let us strike a bargain for 40 purses, on condition that I show you the experiment. But as I suppose you have not so much money about you, I will go with you to your lodgings. I will now lay the tapestry on the ground. When we have both seated ourselves, you will make the wish to be transported into your apartment at the Khan. If we are not transported there, you shall be free of your bargain. As to your present, though I am paid for my trouble by the seller, I will receive it as a favor and be very much obliged to you." The prince accepted the conditions and concluded the bargain. They both sat down on the tapestry, and as soon as the prince made his wish, lo and behold, he presently found himself and the crier at his lodgings. As he wanted no further proof of the tapestry's virtue, he counted out 40 purses of gold for the crier and gave him 20 pieces for himself. In this manner, Prince Hussein became the possessor of the tapestry. He was overjoyed that in the short time he had been in Biznagar, he had already found so rare a piece, which he was positive would gain him the hand of Noronnabar. In short, he looked upon it as impossible for his younger brothers to meet with anything to be compared with what he had found. It was in his power, by sitting on his tapestry, to be at the place of meeting that very day. But since he would be obliged to wait there for his brothers, as they had agreed, and as he was curious to see the king of Bisnagar and his court, and to inform himself of the strength, laws, customs, and religion of the kingdom, he chose to spend some months there and satisfy his curiosity. Now time passed, and although Prince Hussein might have stayed longer at the court of Bisnagar, he was so eager to be nearer the princess that he spread the tapestry. He and the officer he had brought with him sat upon it. And as soon as he made his wish, they were transported to the inn where he and his brothers were to meet. Prince Ali, the second brother, who wanted to travel into Persia, took the road that led there, joined a caravan, and after 4 days' travel arrived in Shiraz, which was the capital of the kingdom. Here he passed for a jeweler. The next morning, he dressed himself and took a walk into the bazaar of Shiraz. Among all the criers who passed up and down with their wares, he was surprised to see one who held in his hand an ivory telescope, about a foot in length and the thickness of a man's thumb, crying it at 30 purses. At first, he thought the crier mad. To inform himself further, he walked over to a merchant standing at his shop door and said, "Pray, sir, is not that man mad? If he is not, I am very much deceived." "Indeed, sir," the merchant answered. "He was in his right senses only yesterday. I can assure you he is one of the ablest criers we have, and the most employed of any when something valuable is to be sold. If he cries the ivory telescope at 30 purses, it must be worth as much or more. He will come by here presently, and we will call him, and you shall be satisfied. In the meantime, sit down on my sofa and rest yourself." Prince Ali accepted the merchant's kind offer, and presently the crier passed by. The merchant called him by name, and pointing to the prince said, "Tell that gentleman what you mean by crying that small telescope at 30 purses. I should be very much amazed myself if I did not know you. The crier, addressing himself to Prince Ali, said, "Sir, you are not the only person who takes me for a madman because of this telescope. You shall judge for yourself when I have told you its property." "First, sir," pursued the crier, presenting the ivory pipe to the prince, "observe that this pipe is furnished with a glass at both ends, and consider that by looking through one of them you can see whatever object you wish to behold. I am ready to make reparation, if this is truly so," the prince said, and holding the ivory tube in his hand, he went on, "Show me at which end I must look, that I may be satisfied." The crier showed him, and the prince looked through, wishing at the same time to see his father, whom he immediately beheld in perfect health, sitting on his throne in the midst of his council. Then, as there was nothing in the world so dear to him after the Sultan as the Princess Naranambar, he wished to see her. And there she was in her dressing room, laughing and in a pleasant humor with her women all about her. Prince Ali wanted no further proof that this telescope was the most valuable thing in the world. He was sure that he would never again meet with such a rarity. He therefore took the crier with him to the Khan, where he lodged, and paid him the money and received the magic telescope. Prince Ali was overjoyed at his bargain and persuaded himself that, as his brothers would not be able to find anything so rare and admirable, the Princess Norabar would be his. As soon as the caravan was ready to return, the prince joined it and arrived at the inn happily without accident or trouble other than the length of the journey and the fatigue of traveling. There he found Prince Hussein, and both waited for Prince Ahmed. Prince Ahmed took the road to Samarkand, and when he got there, he heard a crier, who had an artificial apple in his hand, cry it at 35 purses. He stopped the crier and said to him, "Let me see that apple, and tell me what virtues and extraordinary properties it has to be valued at so high a price." "Sir," cried the crier, placing the apple in his hand, If you look at the outside of this apple, it appears worthless. But if you consider its properties and the great use and benefit it is to mankind, you will say 35 purses is no price at all, and that he who possesses it is master of a great treasure. In short, it cures all sick persons of the most mortal diseases, and if the patient is dying, it will cause him to recover immediately and restore him to perfect health. This is accomplished merely by the patient smelling the apple. If I may believe you, replied Prince Ahmed, the virtues of this apple are wonderful indeed. First you will have to show me that this is so. Sir, replied the crier, the apple is known and believed in by the whole city of Samarkand. Ask all these merchants you see here and listen to what they say. Several will tell you that they would not be alive this day if they had not made use of this excellent remedy. It is the fruit of the study and experiments of a celebrated philosopher of this city. All his lifetime he applied himself to the study and knowledge of the virtues of plants and minerals, and at last produced this apple, by which he performed many surprising cures. But he himself died suddenly before he could apply his own remedy. He left his wife and many young children behind him. They are in want, and she will sell it to provide for her children. Meanwhile, a great many persons gathered around them and confirmed what he said. One said he had a friend who was now dangerously ill and whose life was despaired of, and that this was a favorable opportunity to allow Prince Ahmed to perform the experiment. Upon hearing this, Prince Ahmed told the crier he would give him 40 purses if he cured the sick person. The crier said to Prince Ahmed, "Come, sir, let us go and make the experiment, and the apple shall be yours. I can assure you that it will always have the desired effect." In short, the experiment succeeded, and the prince, after he had counted out to the crier 40 purses, received the apple. He waited patiently for the first caravan that would return to the Indies, and arrived in perfect health at the inn where the Princes Hussein and Ali waited for him. When the princes met, they showed each other their treasures. What was their consternation when they saw through the glass that the princess was dying. They sat down on the carpet at once, wishing themselves with her, and were there in a moment. As soon as Prince Ahmed was in Nouronibar's chamber, he arose from the tapestry, as did the other princes, and went to the bedside, where they put the apple under her nose. Some moments later, the princess opened her eyes and turned her head from one side to another, looking at the persons who stood about her. She then sat up in bed and asked to be dressed, just as if she had awakened out of a sound sleep. Her women told her joyfully that she had the 3 princes to thank for the sudden recovery of her health, particularly Prince Ahmed. She immediately expressed her joy at seeing them and thanked all together, and afterwards Prince Ahmed in particular. While the princess was dressing, the princes went to throw themselves at their father's feet and pay their respects. When they came before him, they found that the prince's chief eunuch had already informed the sultan of their arrival and by what means the princes had been cured. The sultan received and embraced them with the greatest joy, both for their return and for the recovery of the princess, whom he loved as well as if she had been his own daughter. After the usual ceremonies and compliments, the princes each presented his rarity. Prince Hussein his tapestry, Prince Ali his ivory telescope, and Prince Ahmed his artificial apple. They put the decision into the Sultan's hands and begged him to pronounce their fate, to which of them he would give the Princess Nouronibar for a wife according to his promise. The Sultan of the Indies, having heard all that the princes could tell about their rarities and how the princess had been saved, remained silent for some time, thinking what answer he would make. At last he broke his silence and said, "I would give her to one of you children with a great deal of pleasure, if I could do so with justice. But consider whether I can or not. It is true, Prince Ahmed, the princess is obliged to your artificial apple for her cure. But could you have cured her if you had not known by Prince Ali's telescope the danger she was in? And if Prince Hussein's tapestry had not brought you here so soon? Your telescope, Prince Ali, informed you and your brothers that you were likely to lose the princess, and to the telescope all of you must owe a great obligation. You must also grant that your knowledge would have been of no service without the artificial apple and the tapestry. And lastly, Prince Hussein, the princess would be very ungrateful if she did not acknowledge the service of your tapestry, which was so necessary for her cure. But consider it would have been a little use if you had not been acquainted with the princess's illness by means of Prince Ali's glass, and if Prince Ahmed had not applied his artificial apple. Therefore, as neither tapestry, ivory telescope, nor artificial apple has the least preference one before the other, but as, on the contrary, there is a perfect equality, I cannot grant the princess to any one of you, and the only fruit you have reaped from your travels is the glory of having equally contributed to restore her health." "If all this be true," added the Sultan, "you see that I must have recourse to other means to determine the choice I ought to make among you. Therefore, go, each of you, get bow and arrow, and meet me on the great plain where they exercise the horses. I now declare that I will give the Princess Nouronibar to the one that shoots the farthest." The three princes had nothing to say against the decision of the Sultan. When they left his presence, each provided him with a bow and arrow and went to the place appointed for the event, followed by a great multitude of people. As soon as the Sultan arrived, Prince Hussein, as the eldest, took his bow and arrow and shot first. Prince Ali shot next, and much beyond his brother's shot, Prince Ahmed drew bow last of all. But it so happened that nobody could see where his arrow fell. It was not to be found far or near, and though it was believed that he had shot the farthest, and that he therefore deserved the Princess Nouronibar, this could not be proved. The Sultan judged in favor of Prince Ali and gave orders for preparations to be made for the wedding, which was celebrated a few days after with great magnificence. Prince Hussein would not honor the feast with his presence. His grief was so deep that he left the court and renounced all right of succession to the crown to turn hermit. Prince Ahmed, too, did not come to the wedding, any more than his brother Hussein. But, unlike his brother, he did not renounce the world. Determined to discover what had become of his arrow, he stole away from his attendants and resolved to search for it. He went first to the place where Prince Hussein's and Prince Ali's arrows had been gathered up, and going straight forward from there, looking carefully on both sides, he went so far that at last he began to think his labor was all in vain. Yet he could not help going forward, until he came to some steep craggy rocks situated in a barren country about 4 leagues distant from where he had set out. Close by these rocks he perceived an arrow. He picked it up and looked at it intently. He was greatly astonished to find it was the same one he had shot away. Certainly, he said to himself, neither I nor any man living could shoot an arrow so far. And finding that it lay flat, not thrust into the ground, he judged that it had rebounded against the rock. There must be some mystery in this, he thought, and it may be advantageous to me. Perhaps fortune brought it here to make amends for losing what I thought to be my greatest happiness. The rocks were full of caves, some of which were deep. The prince entered one, and in looking about, his eyes fell on an iron door, which seemed to have no lock. As he pushed against it, the door opened, showing an easy descent, down which he walked with his arrow in his hand. At first he walked in shadowy dimness, but presently a light shone ahead of him, and entering into a large, spacious place about 50 or 60 paces distant, he perceived there a magnificent palace. At the same time, a lady of majestic air advanced toward him, attended by a large group of women, each so finely dressed and beautiful that it was difficult to distinguish which was the mistress. As soon as Prince Ahmed saw the lady, he made all haste to pay his respects. The lady, on her part, seeing him coming, addressed him first, saying, "Come nearer, Prince Ahmed. You are welcome." It was no small surprise to the prince to hear his name spoken in a place he had never even heard of, and so near his father's capital. He did not understand how he could be known to a lady who was a stranger to him. He returned the lady's compliment by throwing himself at her feet, and upon rising again, he said, "Madam, 1,000 thanks for your welcome. But may I dare to ask by what chance you know me, and how it is that you should be so completely a stranger to me?" "Prince," said the lady, "let us go into the hall. There I will answer your question." The lady then led Prince Ahmed into the hall. Then she sat down on a sofa, and when the prince, by her entreaty, had done the same, she said, "You are undoubtedly aware that your religion teaches you to believe that the world is inhabited by genii as well as by men. I am the daughter of one of the most powerful and distinguished genii, and my name is Parabanu. You seem to me worthy of a happier fate than that of marrying the Princess Naranabar. I was present when you drew your arrow, and I foresaw it would not go beyond Prince Hussein's. I took it in the air and made it strike against the rocks near which you found it. Now I tell you that it lies in your power to use this favorable opportunity to make yourself happy." As the fairy Parabanu pronounced these last words, her tone changed, and she looked tenderly at Prince Ahmed, a modest blush on her cheeks. It was no hard matter for the prince to comprehend what happiness she meant. He presently considered that the Princess Naranabar could never be his, and that the fairy Parabanu excelled her infinitely in beauty, agreeableness, wit, and as much as he could conjecture by the magnificence of the palace, immense riches. He blessed the moment that he had thought of seeking his arrow a second time, and yielding to his love, he replied, "Madam, should I all my life have the happiness of being your slave, and the admirer of the many charms which ravish my soul, I should think myself the most blessed of men. Pardon the boldness which inspires me to ask this favor, and do not refuse to admit into your court a prince who is entirely devoted to you." "Prince," answered the fairy, Will you not pledge your faith to me when I pledge mine to you?" "Yes, madam," replied the prince in an ecstasy of joy. "What can I do better and with greater pleasure?" "Yes, my sultana, my queen, I give you my heart without the least reserve." "Then," answered the fairy, "you shall be my husband, and I your wife. But as I suppose that you have eaten nothing today," she continued, "a slight repast shall be served you while preparations are made for our wedding feast tonight, and then I will show you the apartments of my palace." Some of the fairy's attendants now left the hall and returned presently with some excellent meats and wines. When Prince Ahmed had eaten, the fairy Paranormal took him through all the apartments, where he saw diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and other fine jewels, intermixed with pearls, agate, jasper, porphyry, and the most precious marbles. The prince said that he could not have imagined such beauty. "Prince," said the fairy, "if you admire my palace so much, which indeed is very beautiful, what would you say to the palaces of the chief of our genii, which are much more beautiful, spacious, and magnificent? I could also charm you with my gardens, but we will let that wait until another time. Night draws near, and it is time to go to supper." The next hall into which the fairy led the prince, where the cloth was laid for the feast, was the last apartment the prince had not seen. As he entered it, he admired the infinite number of sconces of wax candles perfumed with amber. This multitude of lights, instead of giving the appearance of confusion, was placed with so just a symmetry as to form an agreeable light. A large side table was set out with every variety of gold plate, so finely wrought that the workmanship was even more valuable than the gold. Several choruses of beautiful women, richly dressed, began a concert, accompanied by the most harmonious instruments. When they sat down at the table, the fairy Paranormal took care to help Prince Ahmed to the most delicate meats, which the prince found to be so exquisitely good that he commended them with exaggeration, and also said that the entertainment far surpassed any devised by man. He found also the same excellence in the wines, which neither he nor the fairy tasted until the dessert, consisting of the choicest sweetmeats and fruits, was served. The wedding feast was continued the next day, and the days following the celebration were festive indeed. At the end of 6 months, Prince Ahmed, who still loved and honored the Sultan, conceived a great desire to know how he was, but that desire could not be satisfied without a visit. He told the fairy of it and asked her leave. "Prince," she said, "go when you please, but do not take it amiss that I give you some advice on how you shall conduct yourself. First, it is not proper for you to tell your father of our marriage, nor of my rank, nor of this place. Beg him to be satisfied in knowing you are happy, and to desire no more. Let him know that the sole purpose of your visit is to make him easy and inform him that you are well." She appointed 20 gentlemen, well mounted and equipped, to attend him. When all was ready, Prince Ahmed took his leave of the fairy, embracing her and renewing his promise to return soon. Then his horse, which was most finely caparisoned and as beautiful a creature as any in the Sultan of the Indies stables, was led to him, and he mounted him with an extraordinary grace. After he had bid the fairy a last fond adieu, he set forth on his journey. Since it was not far to his father's capital, Prince Ahmed soon arrived. The people were glad to see him again, and receiving him with acclamation, they followed him in crowds to the Sultan's apartment. The Sultan received him with great joy, complaining at the same time with fatherly tenderness of the affliction his long absence had been. The prince told the story of his adventures without speaking of the fairy, in accordance with the promise he had made her, and ended, "The only favor I ask of your majesty is to allow me to come often and pay you my respects and see how you are." "Son," answered the Sultan of the Indies, "I cannot refuse what you ask me, but I would much rather you resolve to stay with me. At least, tell me where I may send word to you if you should fail to come, or when I think your presence necessary." "Sire," replied Prince Ahmed, "what your majesty asks of me is part of the mystery of which I spoke. I beg you to allow me to remain silent on this subject, for I shall come so frequently that I am afraid that I shall sooner be thought troublesome than be accused of negligence of my duty." The Sultan of the Indies pressed Prince Ahmed no more, but said to him, "Son, I penetrate no further into your secrets, but grant you your liberty. You can do no greater pleasure than to come often, and by your presence restore to me the joy I have not felt this long time. You shall always be welcome." Prince Ahmed stayed but 3 days at his father's court, and on the 4th day he returned to the fairy Parabanu. A month after Prince Ahmed's return from the visit to his father, the fairy Parabanu said to him, "Prince, tell me, have you forgotten the Sultan your father? Do you not remember the promise you made to go and see him often? For my part, I have not forgotten what you told me at your return, and so I put you in mind of it." Prince Ahmed went the next morning with an even finer retinue than before, and he himself more magnificently mounted, equipped, and dressed than before, and was received by the Sultan with the same joy and satisfaction. For several months he continued his visits, and always with a richer and finer equipage. At last, some viziers, the Sultan's favored counselors, who judged Prince Ahmed's grandeur and power by the figure he cut, made the Sultan jealous of his son, saying it was to be feared he might inveigle himself into the people's favor and dethrone the Sultan. The Sultan of the Indies was far from thinking that Prince Ahmed could be capable of so terrible a plan. He said to them, "You are mistaken. My son loves me, and I am certain of his tenderness and fidelity." But the counselors went on abusing Prince Ahmed until the Sultan said, "I don't think my son Ahmed is as wicked as you would have me believe. However, I'm obliged to you for your good advice, and I don't dispute that it comes from good intentions." The Sultan of the Indies resolved to have Prince Ahmed watched, unknown to his Grand Vizier. So he sent for a female magician, who came by a back door into his apartment. "Go immediately," he said, "and follow my son when he leaves here. Watch him well, find out where he lives, and bring me word." The magician left the Sultan, and knowing the place where Prince Ahmed had found his arrow, went there immediately and hid herself near the rocks. The next morning Prince Ahmed set out from his father's palace by daybreak. The magician, seeing him coming, followed him with her eyes. Suddenly she lost sight of him and his attendants. The rocks were so steep and craggy that they should have been an insurmountable barrier, so that the magician judged there were but 2 explanations for the prince's disappearance. Either he must have vanished into a cavern or visited the abode of a genie or fairy. She then came out of the place where she was hidden and went to the farther end, looking carefully about on all sides. Notwithstanding all her diligence, she could find no opening, not so much as the iron gate which Prince Ahmed had discovered. For this gate could be seen and opened only by those whose presence was agreeable to the fairy Parabanu. The magician, seeing that this was useless to search any further, had to be satisfied with the discovery she had made, and she returned to give the Sultan the account. The Sultan was well pleased with the magician's conduct and said to her, "Do as you think fit. I'll wait patiently for more information." And to encourage her, he made her a present of a diamond of great value. Since Prince Ahmed had obtained the fairy Parabanu's leave to go to the Sultan of the Indies court once a month, he never failed to do so. A day before one of these visits, the magician went again to the foot of the rock. There she waited all night. The next morning, Prince Ahmed went out as usual by the iron gate with the same attendants as before, and passed by the magician. He saw her lying with her head against the rock and moaning as if she were in great pain. Pitying her, he turned his horse about and went to her and asked her what was the matter. The artful sorceress looked at the prince in a pitiful manner without lifting her head, and answered in broken words and sighs, as if she could hardly catch her breath, that she had been bound for the capital city, but on the way there she had been taken with so violent a fever that her strength had failed her, and she was forced to lie down where he saw her, far from any habitation and without any hope of assistance. "Good woman," replied Prince Ahmed, "you are not so far from help as you imagine. I am ready to assist you and take you where you will find a speedy cure. Rise and let one of my men take you on his horse." At these words, the magician, who had pretended sickness only to know where the prince lived and what he did, could not refuse his charitable offer. Now, one of the prince's attendants alighted from his horse, helped her up, set her behind him, and followed the prince, who turned back to the iron gate. When he came into the outer court without dismounting, he sent one of his men to tell the fairy he wanted to speak with her. Now the fairy Parabanu came with all haste, wondering what had made Prince Ahmed return so soon. The prince, giving her no time to ask him the reason, said, "Princess, I desire you to have compassion on this good woman," pointing to the magician, who was being held up by two of his retinue. "I found her in this condition and promised her aid. Please, out of your own goodness, do not abandon her." The fairy Parabanu, who had her eyes fixed upon the false invalid all the time that the prince was talking to her, ordered two of her women to carry the old woman into the palace and take care of her. While the two women executed the fairy's commands, she went up to Prince Ahmed and, whispering to him, said, "Prince, this woman is not sick as she pretends to be, and I believe she is an impostor who will be the cause of great trouble to you. But don't be concerned. I will deliver you from all the snares that will be laid for you. Go and continue your journey." This discourse of the fairies did not in the least frighten Prince Ahmed. "My princes," he said, "I do not remember that I ever did anybody an injury, and I do not believe anybody can have a thought of doing me one. In the meantime, the two women carried the magician into a richly furnished apartment. First, they sat her down upon a sofa with her back supported on a cushion of gold brocade. While they made up a bed on the sofa, the quilt of which was finely embroidered with silk, the sheets of the finest linen, and the coverlet cloth of gold. When they had put her into bed, for the old sorceress pretended that her fever was so violent she could not help herself in the least. Now one of the women went out and soon returned holding in her hands a china cup full of a certain liquor, which she presented to the magician. "Drink this," she said. "It is the water of the Fountain of Lions and a sovereign remedy against all fevers. You will feel the effect of it in less than an hour's time." The magician took the cup after a great deal of entreaty, and bending her head back, swallowed down the liquor. When she was bedded down again, the two women covered her. "Lie quiet," said the one who had brought her the china cup, "and get a little sleep if you can. We'll leave you and hope to find you perfectly cured when we come again an hour hence." The two women returned in an hour and found the magician dressed and sitting up on the sofa. "Oh, admirable potion!" she cried. It was wrought its cure much sooner than you told me it would, and I shall be able to continue my journey." The two women, who were fairies like their mistress, walked before her and conducted her through several apartments, all nobler than that wherein she lay, and then into a large hall, the most richly and magnificently furnished in the palace. Parabanu sat in this hall on a throne of massive gold, enriched with diamonds, rubies, and pearls of extraordinary size, and attended on each hand by a great number of beautiful fairies, all richly clothed. At the sight of such majesty, the magician was not only dazzled, but so amazed that after she had prostrated herself before the throne, she could not open her lips to thank the fairy as she intended. Parabanu saved her the trouble and said to her, "Good woman, I am glad I have had an opportunity to help you and to see that you are able to pursue your journey. I will not detain you, but perhaps you may not be displeased to see my palace. Follow my women, and they will show it to you." Then the magician went back and related to the Sultan of the Indies all that had happened. She told him how very rich Prince Ahmed was since his marriage to the fairy, richer than all the kings in the world, and how there was danger that he might come and take the throne from his father. Though the Sultan of the Indies felt that Prince Ahmed's natural disposition was good, yet he could not help being concerned at the words of the old sorceress. When she was taking her leave, he said, "I thank you for the pains you have taken and your good advice. I will remember it, and I shall deliberate upon it in council." The spiteful counselors advised that the prince should be killed, but the magician disagreed. Make him give you all kinds of wonderful things with the fairy's help, until she tires of him and sends him away. For example, every time your majesty goes into the field, you have a great expense, not only in pavilions and tents for your army, but likewise in mules and camels to carry their baggage. Now you must ask him to use his influence with the fairy to secure you a tent which could be carried in a man's hand and yet be so large as to shelter your whole army against bad weather. When the magician had finished her speech, the Sultan asked his counselors if they had anything better to propose, and finding them all silent, determined to follow the magician's advice. Now next day the Sultan did as the magician had advised him. Prince Ahmed had never expected that his father would ask a thing so difficult, in fact impossible. Though he did not know how great the power of genii and fairies was, he doubted whether it extended so far as to include such a tent as his father desired. At last he replied, "I will not fail to ask my wife the favor your majesty desires, but I will not promise you to obtain it. If I should not have the honor to come again to pay you my respects, that shall be the sign that I have not had success. But beforehand I desire you to forgive me, and consider that you yourself have placed me in this position." "Son," replied the Sultan of the Indies, "I should be very sorry if what I ask of you should cause me the displeasure of never seeing you again. I think you do not know the power a husband has over a wife, and yours would show that her love for you was very indifferent if she, with her fairy's power, should refuse you so trifling a request." Now the prince went back, very sad and fearful of offending the fairy. She kept pressing him to tell her what was the matter, and at last he said, "Madam, you may have observed that hitherto I have been content with your love, and have never asked you any other favor. Consider then, I beg you, that it is not I, but the Sultan, my father, who indiscreetly asked of you a pavilion large enough to shelter him, his court, and his army from the violence of the weather, and one which a man can carry in his hand. Please remember, it is my father who asked this favor." "Prince," replied the fairy, smiling, "I am sorry that so small a matter should disturb you and make you uneasy." Then the fairy sent for her treasurer, to whom she said, "Nourjahad, bring me the largest pavilion in my treasury." Nourjahad returned presently with the pavilion, which she could not only hold in her hand, but in the palm of her hand. When she shut her fingers, she presented it to her mistress, who gave it to Prince Ahmed. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, ain't we? All right. When Prince Ahmed saw the pavilion, which the fairy called the largest in her treasury, he fancied she was jesting with him. At the surprised look on his face, Paranormal burst out laughing. "What, Prince?" she cried. "Do you think I jest with you? You will see presently that I am in earnest. Nourjahad," she said to her treasurer, taking the tent out of Prince Ahmed's hands, "go and set it up, that the prince may judge whether it will be large enough for the Sultan." The treasurer went immediately with it out of the palace and carried it off a great way off. And when she had set it up, one end reached to the very palace. The prince found it large enough to shelter 2 armies greater than that of the Sultan's. "I ask my princess 1,000 pardons of my incredulity," he said to Paranormal. "After what I have seen, I believe there is nothing impossible to you." "You see," said the fairy, "that the pavilion is larger than your father may have occasion for. It has one unusual property. It can become larger or smaller according to the army it is to cover." Now the treasurer took down the tent again and brought it to the prince, who took it, mounted his horse, and went with his retinue to the Sultan's place. Now the Sultan, who had not really believed there could be such a pavilion, was greatly surprised at the prince's success. He took the tent, and after he had examined it, his amazement was so great that he could not recover his composure. When the tent was set up on the great plain, he found it large enough to shelter an army twice as large as he could bring into the field. Yet he was not satisfied. "Son," he said, "I have already told you how much I am obliged to you for the gift of the tent. I look upon it as the most valuable thing in all my treasury. Still, you must do one thing more for me. I am informed that the fairy, your wife, makes use of a certain water called the water of the Fountain of the Lions, which cures all sorts of fevers, even the most dangerous. As I am sure my health is dear to you, I don't doubt you will ask her for a bottle of that water for me to use when I have the need. Do this for me, and thereby complete the duty of a good son toward a tender father." The prince returned and told the fairy what his father had said. "There's a great deal of wickedness in this dangerous demand, as you will understand by what I tell you," she answered. "The Fountain of Lions is in the middle of a court of a great castle, the entrance of which is guarded by 4 fierce lions. 2 of them sleep while the other 2 stand watch. But don't let that frighten you. I will give you means to pass by them without any danger." The fairy Paranormal was at that time very hard at work with several balls of thread by her side. She took one up, and presenting it to Prince Ahmed, she said, "First, take this. I'll tell you its use presently. Second, you must have 2 horses. One you must ride yourself, and the other you must lead. It must be loaded with a sheep that must be killed today and cut into 4 quarters. Third, I will give you a bottle in which to bring back the water. Set out early tomorrow morning, and when you have passed the iron gate, throw the ball of thread before you. It will roll until it comes to the gates of the castle. Follow it, and when it stops, as the gates open, you will see the 4 lions. The 2 that are awake will be there roaring, wake the other 2, but don't be frightened. Just throw each of them a quarter of a mutton. Then clap spurs to your horse and ride to the fountain. Fill your bottle without alighting and return the same way. The lions will be so busy eating that they will let you pass. Prince Ahmed set out the next morning at the time appointed by the fairy and followed her directions exactly. When he arrived at the gates of the castle, he distributed the quarters of mutton among the 4 lions, and passing bravely through their midst, got to the fountain, filled his bottle, and returned as safe and sound as he went. When he had gone a little distance from the castle gates, he turned and saw 2 of the lions coming after him. He drew his saber and prepared himself for defense. But as he went forward, he saw one turn off the road at some distance. The lion showed by gesture of his head and tail that he did not come to do him any harm, but only to go before him, and the other stayed behind him to guard his rear. He put his sword again into the scabbard. Guarded in this manner, he arrived at the capital of the Indies, but the lions never left him until they had conducted him to the gates of the Sultan's palace. Then they returned the same way they came, frightening all who saw them, even though they proceeded in a gentle manner and showed no fierceness whatsoever. Many officers came to attend the prince while he dismounted from his horse, and they conducted him into the Sultan's apartments. Now the Sultan was at this time surrounded by his counselors. The prince approached the throne, laid the bottle at the Sultan's feet, and kissed the rich tapestry that covered his footstool. I have brought you, sir, the healthful water which your majesty desired, he said. At the same time, I wish you such extraordinary health as never to have occasion to make use of it. After the prince had ended his compliment, the Sultan placed him on his right hand and said to him, Son, I am very much obliged to you for this valuable present, and also for the great danger you have exposed yourself to on my account. I have been informed of this by a magician who knows the Fountain of Lions. But do me the pleasure, he continued, to inform me by what incredible power you have been able to deliver the healing water. Sir, replied the Prince Ahmed, I have no share in the compliment your majesty is pleased to make me. All the honor is due to the fairy, my wife, whose good advice I followed. Then he informed the Sultan what those directions were, and by relating his expedition, let him know how well he had conducted himself. When he had finished, the Sultan, who showed outwardly all the demonstration of great joy, secretly became more jealous and retired into an inner apartment where he sent for the magician. Son, said the Sultan the following day, I have one thing more to ask of you, after which I shall expect nothing more from your obedience. This request is to bring me a man not above 1.5 feet high, but whose beard is 30 feet long, and who carries a bar of iron on his shoulders of 500 weights, which he uses as a quarterstaff. Prince Ahmed did not believe that there was such a man in the world as his father described. The Sultan persisted in his demand and told him the fairy could do much more incredible things. The next day the prince returned to his dear Parabanu, to whom he told his father's new command, which seemed to him even more impossible than the first two. For, he added, I cannot imagine that there exists such a man in the world. I think my father is just testing me to see if I am so silly as to try to find him. Or perhaps he wishes my ruin. How can he suppose that I should conquer a man so well armed, though small? What arms can I use to bend him to any will? If there are any means, I beg you will tell them and let me come off with honor this time. Fear not, my prince, the fairy said. You ran a risk in fetching the water of the fountain of lions for your father, but there is no danger in finding this man, who is my brother, Shibar. He is different from me, though we both had the same father, and he is of so violent a nature that nothing can prevent his showing his resentment for a slight offense. Yet on the other hand, he is so good as to oblige all in whatever they desire. He's exactly as your father described him, and I'll send for him. But be sure to prepare yourself against being frightened at his extraordinary figure when you see him. What, my queen? Prince Ahmed replied. Do you say Shibar is your brother? Let him be ugly or deformed, I shall never be frightened at the sight of him. As our brother, I shall honor and love him. The fairy ordered a gold chafing dish to be set with a fire in it under the porch of her palace, with a box of the same metal, out of which she took a perfume and threw it into the fire. There arose a thick cloud of smoke. Some moments after, the fairy said to the Prince Ahmed, See, here comes my brother. The prince saw Shibar coming gravely with his heavy bar on his shoulder, his long beard, which he held up before him, and a pair of thick mustaches, which were tucked behind his ears and almost covered his face. His eyes were very small and set deep in his head, on which he wore a grenadier's cap. Now, besides all this, he was very humpbacked. If Prince Ahmed had not known that Shibar was Parabanu's brother, he would not have been able to look at him without fear. But as it was, he stood beside his wife without the least concern. Now Shibar, as he came forward, looked at the prince earnestly enough to have chilled his blood in his veins, and asked Parabanu who the man was. She replied, He is my husband, brother. His name is Ahmed, and he is son to the Sultan of the Indies. The reason why I did not invite you to my wedding was that I was unwilling to divert you from an expedition in which you were engaged, and from which I heard with pleasure you returned victorious. I took the liberty now to call for you. At these words, Shibar, looking on Prince Ahmed favorably, said, Is there any way, sister, in which I can serve him? It is enough for me that he is your husband to engage me to do whatever he desires. The Sultan, his father, Parabanu replied, has a curiosity to see you, and I desire that my husband be your guide to the Sultan's court. He needs but lead the way. I will follow him. Brother, Parabanu replied, it is too late to go today. Therefore stay until tomorrow morning, and in the meantime I'll inform you of all that has passed between the Sultan of the Indies and Prince Ahmed since our marriage. The next morning, Shibar and Prince Ahmed set out for the Sultan's court. When they arrived at the gates of the capital and the people saw Shibar, they ran and hid themselves. Some shut up their shops and locked themselves in their houses, while others fled, communicating their fear to all they met. These stayed not to look behind them, but ran too. Shibar and Prince Ahmed found the streets all desolate until they came to the palace, where the porters, instead of keeping the gates, ran away too. The prince and Shibar thus advanced without any obstacle to the council hall, where the Sultan was seated on his throne giving an audience. Now here likewise the ushers at the approach of Shibar abandoned their posts and gave the two free admittance. Shibar went boldly and fiercely up to the throne without waiting to be presented by Prince Ahmed, and accosted the Sultan of the Indies. "You have asked for me. See, here I am. What would you have of me?" The Sultan said nothing, but placed his hands before his eyes to avoid the sight of so terrible an object. At this rude reception, Shibar was provoked. After he had troubled to come so far, and he instantly lifted his iron bar and killed the Sultan before Prince Ahmed could intercede in his behalf. All that he could do was to prevent his killing the Grand Vizier, who had been sitting not far from the Sultan, and who now said to the prince that he had always given the Sultan, his father, good advice. "These are they, then," said Shibar, "who gave him bad." As he pronounced these words, he killed all the other viziers and flatterers of the Sultan, who were Prince Ahmed's enemies. Every time he struck, he killed someone, and none escaped except those who saved themselves by flight. When this terrible execution was over, Shibar came out of the council hall into the center of the courtyard with the iron bar upon his shoulder, looking hard at the Grand Vizier, who owed his life to Prince Ahmed. He said, "I know there's a certain magician here who is a greater enemy of my brother-in-law's than all the rest. Let the magician be brought to me." The Grand Vizier immediately sent for her, and as soon as she appeared, Shibar said at the same time that he swung at her with his iron bar, "This is the reward of your evil counsel." After that he said, "This is not yet enough. I will treat the whole town in the same way if they do not immediately acknowledge Prince Ahmed, my brother-in-law, as their Sultan and the Sultan of the Indies." Then all who were present made the air echo with repeated acclamations of long life to Sultan Ahmed. And immediately after he was proclaimed throughout the whole town, Shibar ordered him to be clothed in royal vestments, installed him on the throne, and after he had caused all to swear homage and fidelity to him, went and fetched his sister Parabanu, whom he brought with all the pomp and grandeur imaginable, and made her the Sultana of the Indies. As for the Prince Ali and Princess Nouranibar, as they had had no hand in the conspiracy against Prince Ahmed, and had known nothing of it, Prince Ahmed assigned them a considerable province with its capital, where they spent the rest of their lives. Afterward, Prince Ahmed sent an officer to Prince Hussein to acquaint him with the change and to offer him whichever province he had liked best. But that prince thought himself so happy in his solitude that he answered with thanks for the kindness offered him, and said that the only favor he desired was permission to live undisturbed in his chosen retreat. Sultan Ahmed and his Sultana Parabanu lived a long and happy life and brought their people a wise and just rule.